Loved ones, this is for our summer school session. This is session 2. If we were meeting, it would be 23 June 2020. And we will today talk primarily about chapter 1. I have a couple of admin things to share with you, though, before we start that. The first is Dropad is still open for another day or so. So if anyone viewing this video is a first-time student, if you registered late, I beg you, immerse yourself in Folio. Look at every document on that page because each of them has significance for you. And clearly, if you have any questions, reach out to me, send me an email, and together we will resolve them. The other thing I want to mention is something that I don't think I talked about in the session 1 video, but I have a couple of thoughts to share, and I think it'll benefit you. The first is I want to talk to you about my teaching style. Many of you are having me for the first time, and that is not scary, but there's a newness to this. So if you look at the syllabus for any given class meeting, I ask you to read a chapter or do something else. So here's my approach to, I desperately wish we were in the same room and that this took the form of an interactive discussion instead of me talking to a machine on a table. But no matter what the platform is, whether it's a digital platform or face-to-face platform, my teaching style is pretty straightforward in this kind of an environment. This is not a doctoral seminar. If I ask you to read chapter 1, as I did for today, I too read chapter 1. And I highlight it and I take notes, and that's exactly what I hope you do. But the point is, the reason I highlight, the reason I take notes is I tend to identify what I would describe as key concepts. And I spend time in our exchanges together. I spend time introducing and developing those concepts. And sometimes I will criticize them if they're worthy of critique. In other cases, I'll simply try to bring them to life. And in every case, I would want you to know how to apply them. That is your decision, but there's clearly some guidance. Now, the second thing about this key concept thing that I want to point out is because all of our exams for this summer session are going to be essay tests, every question that appears on every essay test is going to come from my lecture notes. So it's just so significant, so important for you to view the videos, take notes, read the textbook, and I'd like you to do the same thing I do. I'd like you to highlight and journal and that sort of stuff. So the point is, oftentimes with big classes, I have no choice but to give multiple choice exams, which means I go to an instructor's test bank and I'll draw 50 questions randomly from that. Not so here. Every question that you'll be asked to respond to on a midterm exam is going to come from these presentations. So clearly it benefits you to, not just to pay attention, but to take notes. Yes, imagine that. So those are the 2 thoughts I wanted to share. Those of you who would register, please immerse yourself in Folio. And I wanted to give you a preview since today is our first actual content. This is the first time I'm presenting material from the text. I want you to have a sense for how I'll be approaching this semester. So now I'm going to jump into the lecture notes. I try always, I'm not always successful at this, but I try always to tell you where I am in the text. So the first thing I want to point out is I'm on page 5 right now in the Kinnicky 9th edition book. And there's a really competent definition of management on page 5. And I'm going to read it to you, or at least I'm going to read my abstract of it. Management is defined as the pursuit of organizational goals, integrating the work of people through planning, organizing, leading, and controlling resources. So it's a simple but a competent definition of management, and I really want you to have that foundation because that essentially answers an important question: what do managers do? Now, immediately after the authors present this definition of management, which again is very competent, they talk about the distinction between efficiency and effectiveness, and I'm really glad they do. I don't know why it fits in here, but it's a great discussion point. Excuse me. This distinction between efficiency and effectiveness is generally attributed to Peter Drucker. Drucker was a management theorist, a very prolific scholar, I'm sure a great teacher. I've seen some of his work. So Drucker, sometime in the middle 80s, made this distinction between efficiency and effectiveness. And when I present it to you, if you look at the text, you'll see that it's very simple and very durable. Drucker says that efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right thing. So the obvious point is, they're not the same. To be efficient is not to be effective, and vice versa. Now, in a perfect world, would we always want to be both? If we're going to be efficient, if we're doing things right, what that essentially means is that we're maximizing resources. That's how you try to spend money. Very few of us have unlimited resources when it comes to money. So if you have money, discretionary income, you're trying to maximize it. Yes, you have fixed obligations to take care of, but after that, do you buy clothing? Do you go out dancing? Do you buy me a new shotgun? I'll put that up on the website, the ones that I would like. Perazzi's and Krieghoff's are really cool Italian stuff, although Krieghoff's are German. So efficiency says we're maximizing resources. That's how we do things right. Is it possible, this is not a particularly provocative question, is it possible to be efficient, to do things uncommonly well, and to do the wrong things? It is. That's why Drucker gives us this distinction about effectiveness. Drucker says to be effective is to do the right thing. So, and effectiveness always has primacy. It's always more important than efficiency. If you give me any task, I don't care what it is, teaching, launching a new business, launching a rocket to the International Space Station, if you give me any task, I don't care what it is, I will always key on effectiveness. I always want to do the right thing. If I'm less efficient than optimal, I'm okay with that. But the point is, I can be efficient and choose to do the wrong thing. Let me very quickly build a stupid, goofy example, but you'll probably enjoy it. Let's assume for the sake of discussion that I open a factory here in the borough, and my factory is we're a one-trick pony. We make one product, and our one product is 8-track tapes. That's all we make, but we do them so well. They are flawless. We have absolutely no quality problems. The sound fidelity is remarkable. We are best in class on every dimension you would want. Customer service, pricing, shipping, warranty claims. We are absolutely killing it. We're doing everything right. But we're irrelevant, aren't we? I would guess that 8-track tapes were probably 4 generations ago in terms of us listening to stuff. My memory is that they were very, very common in the 70s, maybe early 80s. And then, of course, we went to audio cassettes. I still have quite a few. Then we went to CDs, agreed. And for 15, 18 years, we've been streaming. So my point is that I can do things right. I can be incredibly efficient and do the wrong thing. In my case of the 8-track tapes, I'm doing something that the market doesn't value. So recognize that these two things are in tension. Efficiency and effectiveness are in tension. My perspective is that if you ever have to choose, you always would choose to be effective. Do the right thing. Do whatever it is that the market wants. Do whatever it is that the mission or the task requires. Do the right thing. It's okay, it's forgivable if you don't maximize resources, if you're not quite as efficient. But to be efficient and not be effective is just dumber than a rock. So, Drucker's observation that efficiency is doing things right and effectiveness is doing the right thing, simple but powerful, really is. Now the authors talk briefly about the multiplier effect, and they're simply talking about us working in an organization. They say that the multiplier effect is the sum of the collective efforts, and of course it's much greater than us working individually. I get that. Could I potentially manufacture a car? I could. I'd have to outsource all kinds of stuff, wouldn't I? Whatever that may mean. I may outsource the manufacture of suspension components or onboard electronics or whatever, but I could assemble it. Do you think that's better from either my perspective as a car company or from the market's perspective if I'm a sole practitioner? So the whole point is the multiplier effect is we sum the collective effort, and it is much, much more powerful, much greater than solo stuff. Ooh, see my little pink note? I think that's pink. Fuchsia, maybe? I'm a man, I don't know what these things are. I'm going to talk to you about the 4 principal functions of management. They actually flow from the definition, but because my objective every time we meet virtually is to put an attendance verification mechanism in place. I'm going to tell you a short story. It's authentic. It's from my time in the military. I spent about 4.5 years on active duty. When I returned from Vietnam, I was assigned to the infantry school at Fort Benning. And I was a resident instructor there for a year and a half, and that was an extraordinary opportunity, developmentally and on every other dimension. That was my very first attempt, or taste rather, of adult education, and I loved it then and I love it now. So, one of the many things that was extraordinary about teaching at the U.S. Army Infantry School was we didn't just teach American soldiers, we taught them by the hundreds, literally, because a company is about 200 soldiers. But in primarily in the IOAC program, in the Infantry Officers Advanced Course, we'd be teaching captains and majors, people. It's kind of like a master's program, if you will. If you're a career soldier, you really need to go to an advanced course because that's the only way you're going to progress. So that course was populated by captains and majors, people that have been in 3, 4, 5 years, and they needed this educational platform to go on in their careers. So in this Infantry Officers Advanced course, we taught allied officers from 55 countries. I would have 200 people in a classroom, kind of like this, a tiered classroom at Fort Benning. And there would be people there who were Israeli officers, Brits, Australians, South Americans. There was a guy from New Jersey, yes, foreign countries all over the world. So we, again, the nature of the beast was that we taught allied officers from 55 countries. And I need to set a context. The year was 1972. And the reason I'm telling you that is it was an election year, just like 2020. And you know how crazy or stupid our elections are, how deeply dysfunctional. People point fingers and accuse each other, make moronic statements, but that's everywhere. That's dog catcher through the presidency of the United States. So in this country, elections are just unholy. They are divisive and stupid and ugly, and I wish we could change. I share this with you though, because 1972 was an election year. And we broke for lunch. We were in this classroom building, we broke for lunch, and we were in some kind of a cafeteria setting, and I happened to be seated across the table from an Israeli officer. And he said to me, smiling over lunch, he said that we Israelis have to take our elections much more seriously than you Americans. And I knew there was a story behind that. And I said, please, go on, tell me more. So he said, in Israel, we elect a prime minister, that is our chief executive officer, much as your president is in the United States. And for someone to be considered as a candidate, not to be elected, but to even be considered as a candidate, they have to have some demonstrated competence in 3 domains. One is military. Are you prior military? Have you ever served? The second is foreign policy. Very big deal if you're Israel. The third is, have you ever successfully run a large organization? And what he told me is, he said, we're patient about which 2 out of 3, but anyone that is a candidate has to have achieved relative mastery of 2 of those 3 criteria. And I was fascinated by that. I was. I wish we did that. I wish we only elected people to presidencies everywhere, university, anywhere, governorships, who had already successfully run large organizations or had these other skills or domain knowledge. But the point is, I wanted to tell you that story because that will lead into the question at the end. So the definition of management, once again, managers integrate the work of people through planning, organizing, leading, and control. So I want to talk briefly about them. I'm on page 9 right now. These are the 4 principal functions of management. Planning is pretty straightforward. Managers establish goals and then decide how to achieve them. What that does is that pairs goals and strategies, doesn't it? The goal is some target on the wall, some important objective, something you want to accomplish. Deciding how to achieve them says that we have to develop a strategy, some plan of action to take us from here to there. So, planning means we have to establish goals and develop strategies. Organizing. We have to coordinate tasks and people and resources and, of course, information to accomplish those things. That is probably the single most critical function of any manager, and that is coordination of people, resources, information to accomplish that goal. I may have some wonderful idea, some great goal, but if I'm not competent, if I cannot coordinate your actions, if I cannot say, all right, that team does this, and then in sequence, B team follows them and they do that, and I need to provide these resources to both of those teams. This notion about organizing is enormously important to successful management. The third thing they talk about is leading. Now, this is where I dissent. I dissent for a variety of reasons. Leadership at its heart means that a leader influences a group of collaborators to accomplish a task. And the reason I dissent, the reason I say that I don't even plan to talk about this concept of leadership right now is I can promise you, you will see the merit of what I'm about to say. Management and leadership are very different tasks. To do them well requires different skills. It is improbable that at any moment in time, anyone on the planet is both a good manager and a good leader. We will develop that much more later. There's a chapter on leadership. I make a long, probably an hour, 15-minute PowerPoint presentation to you on leadership. So I want you to push aside this discussion about leading, because my argument is one that has a lot of support. Management and leadership are not the same thing. You will understand that soon. And to do them well, to do each of them well, requires different skills. So I'm going to push off leading until a later discussion. And then the last thing is controlling. When we say controlling, what we mean essentially is somewhere in this process of management, you have to establish standards. You might call it a budget, some anticipated outcome. We're going to produce these units or make this level of sales or whatever. So you have some sort of a standard of an expected outcome. And then, of course, you gather data in real time and you compare the actual results, what actually happened, with what you expected. And if there's a variance, if there's a difference, you explore that. Was it outside of our control? Were we unable to get certain supplies or whatever the case may be? But the point is, controlling is another fundamentally big part of the management process. So now I'm on page 11, and I'm going to talk to you about 4 levels of management, and it does not distress me, but the textbook talks about 3. Oh dear. So let me tell you what I think is a very useful perspective on 4 levels of management. The first thing I would say to you, and my words are chosen carefully, many times you are in a situation, a role rather, if I will, where you're a team leader. When I say a team leader, I mean you are embedded in a work group. You facilitate the team's activity, but you have very little or no authority. When I say no authority, you cannot fire someone, you cannot bring someone into the team, you don't decide on goals, objectives, you don't decide on resources. You have very little autonomy, very little decision-making authority. So to be a team lead, you're embedded in a work group, and I wouldn't be surprised if many of you have already done that. There are so many part-time jobs. You could be a team lead at KFC, couldn't you? Literally. I know kids who work in restaurants and bars locally who are team leads for the servers or the kitchen staff or whatever. So team leads are people who do some of the tasks that managers do, but they're embedded in the unit. They are literally right there doing the same thing with the other members of that work group. So now, the next level is something that's commonly called frontline managers. And this is typically the first level. I wouldn't be surprised if this is your first job out of college. Really, I would almost expect, with you having degrees in business, that your first job would not be a team lead, but that you would be a frontline manager. So frontline managers, the reason that this is a pure managerial role is those people typically have both authority and responsibility. When I say authority, I mean they can make decisions that impact the work group and its output, and they're also accountable for that. So frontline managers tend to represent the first level of management where people are hired out of college. And it's a great place to start a career. You have direct interactions with the people that report to you, with your subordinates. But unlike the team leads, you have both autonomy. You can make decisions and accountability. And that's a big deal. Now, the third level in my typology, I told you team lead was first, frontline managers are second, middle managers are third. Interestingly, we call people middle managers, and yet they rarely manage anybody. They tend to be staff. They tend to do analytics. They tend to gather market data and do some analytics and try to interpret the outcomes and then make recommendations to people farther up in the organization. So middle managers, I think it's a curiosity. They rarely manage anybody. They perform staff functions. When I say staff, they support whatever the organization does, but they don't have a group of people whose activities they coordinate or oversee. But middle management is a great place to be, truly, if your path is in a managerial track in an organization. And then the fourth level would be the top level managers. There are so many different labels that people assign to that. I want to tell you the one that's probably most common, and that is the top management team, TMT. That's in the literature everywhere. If I said to you, what is a CEO? The vast majority of you would just instantly say, Chief Executive Officer. Well, that's because CEO, that little pseudo-acronym, has been in such common use that we understand it. TMT, in the domain of business, is equally as common. In fact, you'll pick up business literature like the Wall Street Journal or Barron's or something, and it will just say TMT, expecting you to know what that means. So TMT is just a pseudo-acronym for top management team. And it represents the managers at the highest level of an organization, whatever that organization is. Oftentimes, they are called C-level officers because so many of the members of the top management team, the first descriptor starts with a C. Chief Financial Officer, Chief Operating Officer, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Ethics Officer, Chief Executive Officer. So oftentimes, they are C-level officers. But it doesn't matter what their titles are. It's the top group of managers in any organization. And they typically do two things. They have no direct interactions with people whose boots are on the ground. They develop strategies, and they often have external roles. They're on calls, guidance calls, with the financial services community, people in stock brokerage. They interact with bankers. They interact with members of the community. So oftentimes, the top management team has no interaction with people farther down in the organization, except the middle managers who make presentations to them, who say, we've done some market research and we think there's a demand for this sort of a service or a product or whatever. Or we've identified this problem and our recommendations are. So the people with whom top level managers interact are typically middle managers. And the reason I say being a middle manager is a nice place to be is because you're putting yourself in front of some very, very powerful decision makers. And unsurprisingly, that can advance your career or it can retard it. It can make it crash and burn. So, 4 levels of management. Team leads, frontline managers, middle managers, and the top management team. Now, there's a discussion on page 13 about functional areas. And I want to throw a couple of logs on the pile here, because in the text, they don't talk about functional areas. They talk about functional managers. So, a functional area in an organization is a subunit. It's a piece of that organization. And the reason we often call them functional areas is the people in that subunit perform essentially the same function. The accounting department of any organization is a functional area. The marketing department is a functional area. The engineering department, legal affairs, maybe there's one for illegal affairs, I don't know. But you see my point? The people who occupy a functional area have similar education, similar training, similar responsibilities. Not identical, but a great deal of shared knowledge, shared activities. So that's what a functional area is. The people in that subunit perform essentially the same functions. And the reason they talk about this in this chapter is they're not talking about the structure of an organization. They talk briefly about functional managers. But I thought it would be well if we talked about that, what a functional area is. So now I'm on page 19, and they talk about skill sets, and what they say, in my view, is profound. They don't intend it to be profound. They're just saying, here are the skills that essentially predict a successful career in management. So let me tell you what they lay out, and then I'll tell you why I say to you that it's profound. They talk about technical skills, conceptual skills, and interpersonal skills. So technical skills are the skills that you develop in your domain. If you're here studying accounting, if you're here studying logistics and supply chain management, finance, whatever domain you're in, that's where your technical skills come from. There's a body of knowledge, and you learn how to apply that knowledge to organizational settings. So the technical skills have nothing to do with coding or banging on a keyboard. The technical skills are the skills that reside in your knowledge domain. And again, in an organization, in the College of Business, that's pretty easy to figure out. Less so if you're studying gender studies or something like that. So, tech skills, the skills that you develop and learn inside your chosen domain. Conceptual skills, how do you think? How do you approach problem solving? Can you look at a piece of information and synthesize? Can you grab out the important parts? If you look at two pieces of information, can you draw things from them and combine them in useful ways? I don't know. But that's what conceptual skills are. How do you think? How do you approach problem solving? How do you read and interpret documents? How do you integrate across multiple things, whatever the things are? We teach you how to do that here, don't we? And then there's a discussion about interpersonal skills. And most of you sort of understand that, at least on a very base level. Interpersonal skills, how do we interact socially? Okay, that's a big deal. How do we talk, whether it's on a telephone or face-to-face? How do we write, whether the writing is a simple, quick burst like an email, or whether it needs to be a more formal letter where we are proposing something or responding to a challenge or whatever the case may be. But interpersonal skills go beyond just communication and social interaction. Is negotiating an interpersonal skill? Heck yes. And that's a big deal in business. Is conflict resolution an interpersonal skill? Again, of course it is. So, interpersonal skills cast a relatively broad net and would describe almost anything that we do in interacting with other people. And I know many people who choose in their private lives to have no interactions. You could be standing next to your friend and you're texting instead of hugging them or talking or laughing or whatever. And that is sad in ways I can't even describe. But in the context of business, work has to be done. So if you think about these skill sets, the technical skills that you learn in a particular domain, the conceptual skills, how do you think? And then the interpersonal skills, how do I interact with people in multiple contexts, conflict resolution, negotiation, whatever the case may be. Those three sets of skills, technical, conceptual, interpersonal, are identified in the leadership literature as the things that make someone a great leader. But the truth is, that's what we do at the Parker College. Every course you take in this building is going to develop or enhance or augment your technical skills, your conceptual skills, and your interpersonal skills. That's what good colleges of business do. So I praise you. I mean, if you are a Peacock kid, you have chosen well. Not just that you're in the Parker College, but that you made a decision to launch a career in business. You will never, never be disappointed with that decision. And the skills we're talking about are portable, aren't they? You take them out of this building and you can use them anywhere that you wish. So they're personal and they're portable. Hallelujah. I don't know why I have this short discussion about multitasking. It must have been something that was talked about in this section. I don't have a page number, but somewhere in here, in this part of the first chapter, there's a short discussion about multitasking, and the authors make it sound as if it's desirable and achievable. Wrong! I sort of experientially and observationally always thought that multitasking was a wrong direction, because the people I've seen do it typically do several things simultaneously and they do them poorly. lifelong experiences that I could tell you that. But here's something that's not Bill Norton's view of the world. This is not an opinion. What I'm going to share with you now comes from neuroscientists, people who study the brain, the way signals are transmitted and how we process them and that sort of thing. What neuroscientists will tell you is if anything is cognitive, if we have to think about something, I'm not talking involuntary things like my heart beating 54 times a minute or whatever my sitting heart rate is. I'm not talking involuntary things that sustain life. I'm talking cognition, when we have to think about stuff. The brain processes everything that is input sequentially, in sequence. First A, then B, then C. The brain is not capable, in terms of transmitting messages and decoding and that sort of stuff, of considering all these things, or any of these things, simultaneously. And that's what people who multitask think that they're doing. They think they're all that in a bag of Doritos, and they are deluding themselves. Our brains process information. If it's cognition, if we're thinking about something, we process things sequentially, in sequence. So there is no such thing as multitasking. Anyone who thinks there is just doing several things in quick succession, but you're not doing them simultaneously. You're not multitasking. You're doing A, then B, then C, B, then A, C. You're just doing a bunch of stuff fast, and typically it's done poorly. Besides that, it also shows any attempt, if you purposely try to multitask by design, what you're doing is you're demonstrating an inability to focus. Okay, that's a terrible flaw. A terrible flaw. So, flush multitasking. Pretend that you never heard of it, because your life will improve if you go down that road. So now I'm on page 23, and there's a short discussion about competitive advantage. And I realize that this is not a course in strategy, but the title of this course is Principles of Management. It's meant to establish a strong foundation as you take other business courses and as you go down other courses in a managerial track. So I'm going to do something on the whiteboard that literally kind of puts some flesh on the bones. So give me just a moment as we talk about this notion of competitive advantage. So, definitionally, competitive advantage says that relative to competitors in your industry, you have a short-term advantage. I'll give some examples about it in a moment. In fact, let me do one now. Let's assume that I'm a toy company guy. And we, this summer, this fall, roll out some toy for the Christmas season that everybody has to have. You've seen that every year of your lives. You've seen fur babies, leak pads, Tickle Me Elmo. Every single year, there's some toy that everybody has to have, and they're bid up on eBay to $750, and it's nuts. When I was a younger man, my son is 31 right now. When he was about 7, he really liked the Power Rangers. So I was shopping for a Christmas gift, and I was in a Toys R Us, and I bought him some sort of a Power Ranger sword or whatever it was, little stupid plastic thing. While I was doing that, there were 2 women that got in a fist fight over one of these Power Ranger swords or whatever it was. And I thought, stop it. By the way, one of them had a really good right cross. I mean, she could land heat, yes. So, competitive advantage that says in the short term, you're doing something that gives you a competitive advantage over the people, your direct competitors. So, but that's not really developed well in the text, because what I want you to understand is a competitive advantage is temporal, it's short term. Now, there are 3 other categories that I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about sustained competitive advantage, and I want to talk to you about parity, and then I will talk to you about performance that is suboptimal. Now, in every case, what I've done is I've put a classification system on the whiteboard. And I'm saying to you that you can take the performance of any company in any industry, and in a given year, it will discretely fit in one of these 4 categories. Parity essentially says that you are on par, right? You get that, that's the root word. you're on par with others in the industry, so your performance is at the average. That's just the symbol for the mean. Your performance is on average. Let me give you an example. I did a big study of automobile dealers when I was doing my dissertation, and I had data from dealerships all over the nation, and I was studying a performance metric, an accounting measure called return on assets. And for the 3-year period that I studied across tens of thousands of dealerships in the nation, the industry average for return on assets was 8%. Now, at the very same time, the industry average for that performance measure was 8%. The firms that were the upper quartile, the top 25% of auto dealers relative to their performance, their ROA was 17%. Okay, I don't think I'm going to embarrass myself when I tell you that that one's twice that one. Who would you like to work for? Would you like to work for somebody whose performance is average or somebody whose performance is exceptional? Where are the customers going to go? If you're a customer for anything, a dress shirt, a smelly marker, if you're going to buy anything, are you going to persistently buy it from firms that are the average, or are you going to buy it from firms that are excellent performers? You get to answer that question. But I just thought that might be useful. And then, of course, the suboptimal category means something is ugly. You're losing money, you're shedding customers, any number of things could happen there. But these are simply categories. They're ways that we can classify a firm's performance relative to others in its industry. And the textbook talks a little bit about competitive advantage, but it doesn't extend it. What I want you to understand is competitive advantage is temporal. It is short term. Like my toy company example. If I come up with this crazy good toy that everybody has to have for this Christmas season, what's happening on January 1st of 2021? I'm toast. I have to come up with a new product, or I miss the window for the next Christmas season. So my point is, competitive advantage means that short term, you're outperforming your competitors, but it's just that, it's short term. If I were back in industry, I would want to work for a firm that has a sustained competitive advantage. And that means across multiple periods, its performance is considerably better than the average. You would be possibly astonished at how many companies achieve that. A Michelin tire, for decades, 25 or 30 years, has had 55% of the aftermarket in passenger car and light truck tires. It sells more passenger car tires and light truck tires than all the other tire companies in the United States combined. That's competitive advantage. Southwest Airlines has been flying for literally 50 years. I think they've lost money once. 50 years in the airline industry is volatile and as hyper-competitive as that is. And here you have a company in the domestic airline industry that's knocking it out of the park. So, sustainable competitive advantage says that you outperform others in your industry on a long-term basis. Competitive advantage says you may have a short-term advantage. Hallelujah. But it's not durable. Parity means that you are hovering at the industry average, the mean. And if your performance is suboptimal, you're losing money or other things, and life is not good. Now, unsurprisingly, you can move from any of these categories on a year-to-year basis, can't you? Could you be at the average once and then sort of make some important decisions and make your way to sustainable competitive advantage? You could. Could you be up here and crash and burn? You could. So this is fluid. This classification system is fluid, but it's important. And the reason I wanted to share this time with you is they talk about, the authors talk about competitive advantage, but they don't make it clear what it is. And I wanted you to see the other pieces of the puzzle. So that's from my perspective, that is timeless. So now I'm still on 23, and there's a discussion of the significance of e-commerce, and I want you to know that my eyes rolled when I read that. I have data from 2018. I don't have 2019 data, and I don't need to, because e-commerce is surprisingly insignificant. I know for the last 60, 75 days it's been a big deal because of lockdowns and sheltering in place and a variety of things like that. But for 2018, that is not exactly ancient history. I just don't have full year data for 2019. The total retail sales that were done electronically, total, were 8% of all the retail sales in the nation. And of that 8%, Amazon had 4%. Amazon had half of all the online sales in 2018. But my point is, many of you may think Amazon is some monster and just crushes everybody. 4% of the retail sales? Doesn't that tell us that 96% of the retail sales happen somewhere off the Amazon platform? It's precisely what it tells us. So even though many of you may delight in e-commerce, I buy a lot of stuff online, here is our shared reality. Everything that is significant in our lives, everything that is significant is physical. Energy, food, transportation, medicine. E-commerce is something between a convenience and a distraction. It's unimportant, yet everybody obsesses about it. And I don't know why. I really don't. Also, in the same discussion, or same part of the chapter, they talk about things that are throwing a long ball. They talk about AI, artificial intelligence. And it's fair to say that we've got some useful AI right now, but they just process the most simple transactions, like you pumping fuel into your car. That is a form of artificial intelligence. But if you think about AI, if you think about autonomous vehicles, if you think about electrification, that stuff is all early stage. I wouldn't be surprised if those three things are not perfected for 25 years. I'm quite sincere. If we just talk about, everybody obsesses about Elon Musk and Tesla. I think the guy's crazy. I mean, he smokes blunts on television, and we're supposed to hold him up as a visionary. No, he's a stoner. Electric vehicles. I have a great deal of domain knowledge in cars, and there are a lot of reasons for that, but I won't go into them right now. Here's something that's verifiable. Everybody in electric cars is using lithium-ion batteries. In fact, that's the reason that Tesla has no competitive advantage. None. Zero. All Tesla's got is software and lithium-ion batteries. And he's competing against firms that are 100 years old with a worldwide presence. General Motors, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes. He's just splashy, and he's got a cult group of people that follow him, and I wish him well, but I don't think that he is authentic. I really don't, in terms of manufacturing cars. I mean, the company is now 17 years old, and it hasn't yet had 1 year of profitability. It's had quarters of profitability, but you can manipulate that. Here's my point, though, when I say to you that this stuff is far off. Everybody that's making EVs is the only thing they have that makes a motor vehicle, an electric vehicle, is software and lithium-ion batteries. And right now, I study this rigorously. Right now, there's no emergent tech. There are people who are trying to go down different paths, but there's nothing on the horizon, nothing foreseeably in 10 years that's going to replace lithium-ion batteries. So if there were some breakthrough, if somebody came up with something path-breaking, if we had a battery pack in a vehicle that was smaller, weighed less, cost less, and was more energy dense, we could go more than 250 miles on a charge. If we could do that, it's possible that electrification would become broadly accepted. I'm not going to spend $110,000 for a car that in its best day ever goes 300 miles. That's without air conditioning, going up and down hills, a million other things like that. So my point is that electrification is a long way off, if it's even the right choice. Autonomous vehicles, are you kidding me? Am I talking to anyone here that's not had an electronics device fail? If you're not screamed at your phone, your laptop, your tablet, your computer because it froze or did goofy things or whatever, and now you're going to get in the car and say, "You're in charge, little electronic brain." I'm thinking no. You do what you want, but my point is, autonomy is a long way off, electrification is a long way off. We've got some AI right now. Facial recognition software is a manifestation of artificial intelligence, and I just see that as a big surveillance trap. Tell me the benefit of facial recognition software, please. Send me an email. Tell me how that's going to benefit us as standard, ordinary people. I'm on 26 right now. They're talking about some of the challenges that managers face. One of the things they raise is the challenge of shifting demographics. I will just touch upon two. There are so many. I mean, you can take somebody and classify them in so many ways demographically: family composition, income levels, education. I mean, demographics can be sliced and diced in dozens of ways, maybe hundreds of ways. The people in marketing understand demographics better than I do. But the point is, the demographics just says that there's a group of people would be defined by its shared attributes. So let me give you just two, just to talk about the challenges of demographics. The first would be age cohorts. I was born in 1948. That makes me a member of the baby boomer generation. Many of the people to whom I'm speaking are probably Gen Z, born after 1996. I don't know. I'm not going to check IDs. But my point is, if you're 21 or 22 years old, you have different needs than a 72-year-old guy, don't you? I need more ammo. Yes, I do. More guns. Yes, I need lots more. I have 3 degrees and a great job. You're climbing that ladder, aren't you? Right now, you're pushing hard to get a great foundation, a bachelor's degree that is useful, that will equip you for a lifelong, for career paths and a life of independence and dignity. And I celebrate you. But my point is, I have different health needs, different transportation needs. I no longer have children at home, so I don't need to worry about daycare or taking you to piano lessons or karate or whatever you may be doing after school, or fighting the homework wars, or bailing you out of jail, or all the other things that happen in parenting contexts. So my point is that across these age cohorts, boomers, millennials, Gen Z, others, whatever others may be, we have differences, we have different needs. If I were 32, I can promise you I'd have kids at home, so that means childcare, cars with 4 doors, yes? All kinds of things like that, different feeding things, caregivers occasionally. I've been going to pediatrics on a regular basis with my children, not now. So different age cohorts have different needs. That's a big deal, and it's a big challenge. The other thing too would, I'm going to key on a term of foreign-born rather than talk about cultures or subgroups inside the United States. And admittedly, many people who are Hispanic are not foreign-born. They were born in the United States. But in recent years, in the last 4 or 5 years, I've watched the census data. The population of Hispanic individuals in the United States now is larger than the population of what you would call the African American community. The black community is around 11 or 12%. The Hispanic community is around 13%. Just nominally larger. And again, everybody that's Hispanic is not foreign-born. That's a preposterous argument. But my point is, if you look at these groups, whatever these groups may be, they have different purchasing needs, don't they? When I walk into any grocery store, there is always an aisle for Hispanic foods, always. So again, the fact that demographics are groups of people who cluster around some shared purchasing attribute, and it's driven by age, family composition, education, income, a whole bunch of stuff. But those are big challenges for people who are managerial because you have to respond to the changing needs of those demographic groups. Now there's a short discussion on 26, I guess, about globalization and nationalization. And I'll tell you something that I think is consequential, and I promise you it's verifiable. I have all kinds of evidence for that. 25 or 30 years ago, let's even say 1980. Let's just stick with 1980 because that takes us 40 years ago. There was an enormous push towards globalization. Let's reduce barriers. Let's do away with tariffs. Let's buy stuff all over the world and sell stuff all over the world. Presumably, everybody would benefit. Didn't work out that way, did it? So after probably 25 years or more, or 30 perhaps, of globalization, there is today a significant movement towards nationalization. If you look at President Trump's campaign promises in 2016, he said, "I will make America great again. I will put American citizens first." I am very supportive of that position, but this is not a political discussion about the sitting president. Hands down, Trump is focused on the well-being of American citizens. And he's been combative with other countries that do things that tear away at our economy. And I'm thankful for that. But this isn't just Donald J. Trump. Didn't Britain just do a Brexit? Didn't it just exit the European Union? Oh my goodness, it certainly did. That's also true. Do you think China is nationalistic? Are you kidding me? China wants to be a dominant power in the world. It doesn't want to share power. It wants to be the dominant power in the world. Silk Road, Belt and Road Initiative, aggressive diplomatics, what it's doing in the South Pacific on the Stratly Islands and all these other people, its crush of the autonomy for the folks who live in Hong Kong, its hatred of Taiwan. Taiwan established itself as an independent nation in 1949. That's a long time ago, but China still thinks it belongs to China. Taiwan doesn't think it belongs to China. So my point is that there may have been, for a couple of decades, 2 or 3 decades, a push towards globalization, and what leaders in their respective countries realized is that did not serve their peoples well. Some benefited and others didn't. There was no broad distribution of wealth or improvement in quality of life. So many nations, as I say, the US, Britain, China, Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil, many nations have become highly nationalistic. Their leaders, well, except for China, their elected leaders are going to do what's best for their citizens. That is as it should be. So all I'm saying is there was for 25 or 30 years a big push for globalization. We have been retreating from that for at least a decade, maybe longer. Many parts of the world, have been retreating from globalization and moving more towards benefiting the peoples of our respective nations. That's what leaders are elected to do. There's a discussion now on the role of ethics. I'm going to not even touch it today. And I'm not going to touch it today because we have both a chapter that talks about ethics and governance and corporate social responsibility. And I also have a PowerPoint presentation that will take up, I guess, the bulk of a class meeting where we talk about ethics. And the reason that is so significant, ethics are behaviors, that won't surprise anybody, but you and I think ethics are critical for people in organizational settings, especially managers, because you and I will often have to make decisions that impact people outside of our organization. They had no voice. They just have to deal with the consequences of the decisions that we make. So my point is that in my view, if you're in an organizational setting and any decision you make impacts people outside of your group, you must consider the implications. You have to make ethical decisions. That's why we'll take a relatively deep dive into ethics a little bit later in the summer session. And the last topic that's in the text that I'm going to skip over is entrepreneurship. We'll do that later. There's a chapter in entrepreneurship. I'm making a presentation to you on entrepreneurship. But this is not me teasing you, but I will draw an important distinction. Entrepreneurship is dissimilar from every other business discipline. Every discipline in business except entrepreneurship is about control. Management is about controlling people and the flow of information and resources. Accounting is about controlling cost. Finance is about the control of resources. Supply chain management, we control how things flow across organizations. Every discipline in business except entrepreneurship is about control. Entrepreneurship is about creation. New products, new means end, new distribution channels, new combinations. So entrepreneurship is strikingly different from all the other business disciplines. And that's why I'm not going to talk about it in an intro chapter. We'll talk about it later. So I'm now at the point where the content that I intended to deliver for this session is done. And this is when I pose the question that you must answer to verify that you virtually attended this class. Before I do that, let me remind you that I have a little over 100 students in this B term, and that means that and I have 5 classes a week, so wouldn't that mean 5 emails for every kid? So I'm sending and receiving 1,000 emails a week just on attendance, if you attend all 5 classes during the week instead of push it off into the weekend or something like that. So I have an enormous amount of traffic in my inbox. And I will not respond to an email if you don't tell me the class and the section and the session number. So anytime you send me an email for any reason, yes, your name will be in there somewhere, but tell me the class you're in, the section that you're in, because I usually teach multiple sections, and the session. This would be session 2 for Management 3130. So make sure that every email you send me has those identifying features, because if I don't know who you are, I'm not going to take the time to track you down. That's your responsibility. So the question is, what 3 attributes do Israelis look for when they are considering someone to become their prime minister? So we're done for today. Love you. I will be talking with you soon.